Alrighty guys, in today's episode, I will be going over and telling you the best jobs in Bravely Default Fairy HD Remaster. Let's get into it. So I've been playing a lot of Bravely Default recently. I've seen a couple tier lists and I wanted to put together my own. I've been playing the game on normal difficulty, and I've been playing about how you would if you were a casual player. Not too much grinding, getting through the story the best I can, with the occasional grinding in the game. And so, I just wanted to compile my thoughts and my list for what jobs I think are the best in this game. There are a couple things I want to go over before we get started. First, this list is composed of every job and throughout the entire game. What I mean is that a lot of lists I've seen have actually given really just what jobs are best by the end of the game. However, I'm taking into account the entire game, including the end of the game, the middle of the game, and when you get the job. So jobs that might be really strong at the very beginning of the game for like 2 or 3 chapters might be more heavily weighed than jobs that are only good in the final chapter of the game. I also want to say that the jobs and their rankings are going to be based off of how they perform individually. That means that I'm going to be looking at how strong they are, how defensive they are, and the abilities they get, both active and support abilities. What that also means is that jobs that have really good support abilities that benefit multiple jobs throughout the entire game are going to be favored more than jobs that are only good if you have specific support abilities. For instance, if a job is only good if it has MP up, that is a negative. However, if a job provides MP up to other jobs, then that is a positive. And the final thing I want to say is this is just my opinion. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions down in the comments below. I also have an entire Let's Play of this game coming out right now on this channel, so if you guys do find this interesting and want to hear more about my thoughts throughout the entire game, go make sure you check that out. And if you enjoy this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're trying to reach 500 subscribers by August, so it'll really help me out, and it'll help make sure you don't miss any upcoming videos. So, with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so coming in at number 24, the job that I think is the worst in the entire game is the Arkinist. This is the only job in the entire game that I just was never compelled to use. I think it's really bad, and you just get it so late in the game that I don't find it useful anymore. It's supposed to be a good class when you combine it with the Black Mage, but by the time you get it, you're probably not even using your Black Mage anymore, and a lot of their abilities just aren't that good. Their outfits look really cool though. And to make it even worse, some of their strongest abilities, like Annihilation and Iniquity, they actually do a ton of damage to both allies and enemies if they have a +1 or -1 BP more or less, which means if you're fighting bosses or enemies who usually don't even use their BP, you're not even going to be able to take advantage of these two powerful skills, and you're probably just going to hit your allies more than anybody else. Coming in number 23 is going to be the Conjurer. This is the final job you can get in the game. You can get it at chapter 6, which is 2 chapters after the last job you just previously got. That is way too late for you to be getting any job, especially a job that relies so heavily on MP. Basically, this job is your stronger summoner. Their whole thing is that they summon creatures, do a ton of damage, but it costs a lot of MP. As you can see here, a single invocation is actually going to cost 90 MP, and it's not even going to do any damage to the enemy. It's just going to buff yourself, which is unfortunately just not useful as late as you get this job. Again, this is a job that relies so heavily on you using both the Conjurer and the Summoner combined, and you get it so late. It's one of the reasons I said at the beginning, I'm going to dock it if it's only useful with another job. The one thing I will give it is that it has an A rank in every single arms aptitude, which is really cool, but by that point you just have lores and everything else. The only other thing is their specialty here, the post-battle MP. After every battle, you recover 25% of your maximum MP. However, by the time you get it, you don't have an MP problem. Most of your casters are going to have over 600 MP by this point anyways, and so that is why it falls at number 23. Coming in at number 22 is the Valkyrie, and I'm going to be honest, this is my biggest disappointment in the entire game. I love the Dragoon class in RPGs. The classes that do jumps and take a turn where they don't do anything, then come back and do high damage. However, while this is supposed to be it just is not very good. By the time you get it, their regular attack damage from doing a regular attack skill is so mediocre compared to all the other jobs you have at this point. And their biggest problem is their abilities. Every single good ability it has requires you to use BP, meaning most regular enemy fights you're not going to be able to get through, and bosses just are going to tank your damage while you're using your BP. And by this point in the game, you do not have an effective BP battery. Late game, I could see this being a little better, and honestly, I'd love to try it out again. However, it was just such a disappointment that I could not take it any higher than rank 22. I also want to mention, this is the only job that naturally gets S rank in spears, which means if you're not playing a Valkyrie or investing in a Valkyrie, you can't use an entire weapon group in the game. That's just such a disappointment because spears are so cool. And look at the outfits. Are you kidding me? Like, what's going on with Tiz and Ringabel there? Coming in at number 21 is going to be the Swordmaster. And man, it has such a cool name and just really doesn't perform as it should. The biggest thing with the Swordmaster is its role is counterattacking. It has these Bushidos here, and you learn different ways to counter. Basically, if you use this skill right here, Nothing Ventured, and then are hit by a physical attack, you will counter that attack doing 2 times damage. You have the same thing for magical attacks, and that's the basis of the Swordmaster. The problem is, that means you have to rely very, very heavily on what attacks the enemies are going to use. I think this can be somewhat useful in boss fights where certain bosses only use one type of move, such as if a boss only uses physical moves, you can pretty much just use Nothing Ventured and you're always going to counter. However, you're still going to take that damage. So even if you counter, you're still taking damage from those attacks, and it just really isn't very useful, especially in overworld battles like this, where we have 2 physical attackers and a magical attacker. Like, what am I gonna do here besides get hit and counter some of the attacks? The only reason the Swordmaster isn't lower is because of the level 3 ability, Katana Lore. Katana Lore means if you have this support ability equipped, your arms aptitude for katanas is S rank. Now, I'm a sucker for katanas. I really like the katanas in this game. I know they probably don't deal the most damage, but they're so fun to use. There's some really powerful ones with some really cool abilities, and that's honestly the only reason I have this at 21. It probably could go below the Valkyrie or the Conjurer if I thought about it, but I had to give it a couple more points just because I've been using Katana Lore on Tiz since I first got this job available to me. And coming in at number 20 is going to be the Thief. Now, this is probably the last job that I just didn't really use throughout the entire game. The whole point of the Thief is that they dodge a lot of attacks, or so they're supposed to. My problem with the Thief is I think they are both the physically weakest damage dealer in the game and the squishiest job in the game, meaning they're not going to be dealing a ton of damage, and if they don't dodge, which they're not going to when you first get this job, you're just going to be hit and killed almost every single time. The one saving grace it has is steal. Steal has a chance to steal any item from an enemy in the game. There are abilities and equipment that you can get that increases your steal chance. Again, the reason this is even placed at number 20 and not lower because of how squishy and not damage dealing it is because some of the bosses throughout the entire game, especially late game, have some of the best equipment you can get that you can only get from stealing from them. So if you don't steal, you just miss out on some weapons and armor that you really should have gotten when you could. And even still, the biggest downside of the Thief is this weapon right here, the Thief's Knife. This is a dagger that comes automatically equipped with the Mug ability. The Mug ability is just the steal ability that deals damage, which means instead of using that support ability, you can just use the thief's knife on any job in the entire game, meaning you can steal without even using the thief. You could never get the thief in the entire game, and as long as you have this thief's knife right here, you can still steal from all of those bosses that have the strongest items in the game, meaning thief is actually completely useless. I just ranked it at 20 because I don't like to use this thief's knife, and sometimes I just like to throw steel on somebody who's not doing anything else. And now we're on to jobs that I think have some purpose in the game, and jobs that I personally used and found useful at one point or the other. And coming in at number 19 is going to be the Time Mage. Now, this is where I think the list is going to start getting really divisive. I've seen a lot of people really like the Time Mage. If you don't know what the Time Mage does, it has time magic, which gives you spells like slow, meaning you can lower the speed of an opponent, and haste, which raises your team's speed, as well as having the only reliable earth damage in the entire game with spells like Meteor, as well as having spells like Graviga, which deal a percentage of HP damage to a target. Now, it has a really slow chance of hitting. Basically, this is just a job that can really speed up or slow down the tides of battle and give your team an advantage. The reason it's coming at number 19 is that throughout my entire time of using Time Mage in this game, I have never found a single boss or enemy where I have felt like I've needed to use a quick or slow effect. Same with spells like Meteor or Quake. There's very few enemies weak to earth, and honestly, I just didn't really find it useful for those enemies, because odds are you're going to be running it on your healer or your support character anyways, meaning you're just not going to be dealing a ton of damage with your spells anyways. The one benefit I will give the Time Mage is it has one of the most useful early game abilities, your magic attack up. It has both magic attack 10% up, and at level 13, which is much later, but it does have magic attack up by 30, meaning if you are using a magical attacker, you might as well give them this magic attack up. Early game, I gave both Agnès and Ringabel, both my support and my damage dealing casters, this magic attack 10% up. It was very, very powerful. You could actually feel the difference it was making early game when you first get this job. Other than that, though, I just didn't really find myself using the time magic very often, which is why it's coming in at number 19. And coming in at number 18, and I know this one's going to make a lot of people mad if they've played this game, is going to be the Summoner. I think this is one of the most underrated jobs in the game. This was a fantastic secondary job that I used for the first 3 chapters of the game. If you don't know how the Summoner works, basically you have to go around the world and find mages who will summon an attack on you, and all you have to do is survive. If one character survives the attack from a summon, then your whole party learns that summon. There's a summon for every single type in the game. I only have 3 here just because I haven't used Summoner very often, but you basically deal high elemental damage of a specific type to a group of enemies. Now, let's talk about the bad, and the reason a lot of people don't like it is the mana cost. When you get this early game, 40 mana is killer. Your strongest damage dealing magical attacker likely only has about 200 MP, giving you only about 4 to 5 casts of summoning. And if you're going through things like dungeons where you're constantly fighting enemies, or basically just don't have a way to rest and heal up your MP, you are going to tear through your MP like crazy. And unfortunately, after a certain point, you're just not going to be dealing that much damage with your magical attacks. However, one of the biggest things with the Summoner is there are very, very specific bosses in this game that are going to constantly summon out enemies to help them fight. The perfect example I will use is the Performer boss in Chapter 3. She is constantly, every time you kill her enemies surrounding her, she is going to take the next turn to re-summon those enemies. However, if you have a really strong Summoner, which damages every enemy, you will do so much damage that you will kill the adds the second they spawn in. You can see here, we're not doing too much. However, I think it warrants being this high on the list just because of its usefulness in very specific boss fights. I also do just want to quickly point out a very unique skill here. If you're doing the friend summons in this game, this is the perfect job to do it with because of the abilities like Friendship here. Friendship increases the amount of affinity you use when you're using a friendship summon, which is super cool, as well as Amp Friends, which boosts the things that your friend summons do. So while this does pretty much just fall into summon big creatures that do mediocre damage for a lot of MP, it does have the really cool use of being the only job that really interacts with the friend summoning in this game, which I find pretty cool. And coming in at number 17 is going to be the Templar. This is one of the final jobs you get in the game, and honestly, it's just not very good. It's supposed to be basically your stronger version of your Knight, which is one of the first jobs you get, being a very bulky, very physically and magically defensive character. However, by the time you actually unlock it, most of your characters are tanking the attacks anyways, or you just have more efficient ways to either heal the damage you're taking every turn, or just dodge out of the way and take no damage. So, unfortunately, while it's a decent tank, you just get it way too late for it to be reliable. However, I want to point out one key thing here. First, it just uses a lot of BP for all of the abilities it has. Every ability costs either insane MP or insane BP to actually be able to use. However, there is one boss in the game, the vampire boss, that this job trivializes because of the ability Rampart. For 2 BP, you form a shield around your entire team that fully prevents one physical attack. The vampire fight, and a couple other fights in the game, but notably the vampire fight, is at the point of the game that you try to fight it in Chapter 4, is the heaviest hitting boss in the game, and can basically one-shot you or two-shot you without you being able to react. If you keep a Rampart up, and by this point you do have a BP battery to constantly be giving you BP back, you can completely negate one of its attacks, and it will always follow up with an attack that will only deal damage to you if you're damaged. Meaning, if you throw a Rampart up and block that vampire's attack that hits every character, that vampire will then immediately use another attack which only damages characters that have been hit, but you just avoided being hit. Meaning, you can turn one of the hardest fights in the game into one of the easiest fights in the game with a single ability Rampart, which is the only reason it is currently sitting at number 17. And coming in at number 16 is going to be the Freelancer. This is the starting job in the game. Every character comes with it equipped before you ever get any other job. It's also the only job where every person has their own unique outfits, as you can see there. I'm putting this about at the halfway point because of its raw potential that it can do in the late game. First thing I want to take note of here is this ability here called Examine. The way Examine works is you can basically choose an enemy and you're going to see everything about that enemy. So as you can see here, we see its HP, we see what it's weak to, and we see its family. All three of those are incredibly important, especially early game. Not only does it constantly show how much HP they have, but also early game when you're using black magics that are dealing elemental damage for their weaknesses, and things like Slayers, which do specific damage to specific types of enemies, Examine makes you be able to see all of that. And unfortunately, it's the only ability and only job in the game that actually lets you see that, which is a little disappointing because that basically means you always have to be running the Freelancer job in order to actually see their weaknesses. Personally, I ran Miscellany with the Examine skill throughout most of the game. I only took it off in like Chapter 6 because I started fighting enemies I'd already seen before, so I personally recommend just keeping it on, especially for your first 4 chapters when you're still learning the game, because it's really, really fun just to be able to see what all they have. I do want to point out 2 abilities that this job has. The first here is going to be Dungeon Master. This makes it so that way any traps or status ailments that you might find throughout a dungeon do not affect your entire team. As far as I can count, there are 4 dungeons in this game that either deal damage to you or afflict a status effect that this ability completely nullifies. So if you're going through those dungeons, just throw it on. It only costs 1 support point, and it's pretty solid. There's also Divining Rod here. If you're not looking up a guide or looking at a map that has the location of every chest, this will show how many chests are left in your floor of the dungeon you're on, making it really easy to collect them all. And the final thing is actually the specialty here. The specialty is the Late Bloomer. This is one of the reasons it has probably the highest potential in the game. However, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, just because it's the best in the final chapter of the game after everything's maxed out does not mean it belongs at first place. Basically, your HP, MP, physical attack, physical defense, and magic defense, pretty much every stat except for speed and crit rate, each rise by 1% with every job mastered. Meaning, if you have this equipped or the specialty equipped, your base stats, and that's without actually getting an increase, meaning it can go even higher than this, your base stats with all jobs maxed out is a 24% increase to every single stat. Combine that with buffs that might increase your physical attack by another 50%, and you are now sitting at a 74% increase to all stats. It's kind of crazy, however, you just can't use it till the end of the game after you're able to grind up all your jobs, and for that reason, we have it sitting at number 16. And coming at number 15 is going to be the Red Mage. This is what I would personally think the second worst job in the game is. In fact, in Chapter 4, when I was putting this list together originally, I had this at the very bottom of the list. I found absolutely no use for it. It's an all-around stat character because the whole thing is that they're supposed to be able to not only do things like attack at a decent amount, but they also have access to black magic and white magic at the very beginning. But the problem is, it doesn't even go up to max level black and white magic, and their actual attack stat is terrible. Meaning you're not going to be physically attacking, you're not going to be magically attacking, and the only real use is going to be to use the white magic, but at that point, just use a white mage. I found the stats and all-around spread of this job absolutely terrible. So, you might be asking, why is this job at number 15? Well, that's because of 2 very important support abilities. And the first of those 2 support abilities that's keeping this from being at the bottom of the list is actually going to be MP up by 20%. This raises your maximum MP by 20%. You get this job in Chapter 2, meaning for most of the game, at least for the first or the next 2 chapters, you can just increase your maximum MP. In fact, I ran it on my healer up until very, very recently when I just got better support abilities. So this really helps out other jobs, such as your summoners who require a lot of MP, your damage dealing casters who are constantly casting damage dealing spells every single turn, and your white mage who, whenever they get later in the game, are having to cast Kiragas and Kirajas for a lot of MP. This just raising their maximum MP by 20% at a level 2 ability, no less, is just so strong of a support ability, and you really don't have that many early game. And the second one, if you can see on all my characters being at level 4 Red Mage, is going to be turntables. The way this works is you raise your BP by 1 when you evade an enemy attack. Now, that is only useful for exactly 6 fights in the game against the elemental dragons. If you guys are going for the vampire job, then you've experienced all 6 of these elemental dragons, who, at the point of the game where you can fight them, has the potential to one-shot your entire party. The reason turntables is so good is that all you have to do is evade, and you will get 1 BP. You combine that with the ninja class, which has a guaranteed evasion and counterattack, and those dragons in Chapter 4, who have about 90,000 HP and can one-shot your entire team with a breath weapon, become a joke. And you can only do this properly if you have turntables, because that way you can always be dealing damage and always be getting your BP back after every single time you counter. To put this in even more perspective, if you go watch my Let's Play, I fought that dragon 4, 5, 6 times and couldn't even get it past turn 3 or 4 because my whole team was dying. The second I discovered specifically the turntable strategy, I beat all 6 dragons on my very first try. If it wasn't for turntables, the red mage probably would be at the bottom of the list. But because it helped me cheese the only 6 fights, which are really just one fight 6 times in the entire game, that is the entire reason it is sitting at number 15. And coming at number 14 is going to be the merchant job. This is another very, very divisive job. I think a lot of people would put this much higher if they only look at the end game. The whole thing with the merchant is their abilities and commerce do a lot of different things, but they all require the usage of money. Such as this, you spend your level times 50 PG to raise the crit rate of an ally, or things like takeover. This is one of the strongest skills in the game. You spend your level times 50 PG to damage one target, doing a ton of damage to targets. You also have things like BP drink, making this an ideal BP battery character early game. You purchase using your PG and use a BP recovery potion on a character. It's very, very good on paper in the early game. The problem is you have to have the money in order to actually use it. And early game, you're probably strapped for cash. Until you're able to grind in Chapter 5 onwards, I just personally do not find the merchant a very viable job. I use it in a lot of fights because if I was really low and in trouble, I would just hit it with one of the attacks that uses PG and do a ton of damage to it. But then I wouldn't be able to go buy anything because I just used all my money early game in order to kill a boss. However, there's one really good skill that is keeping this at the place it is, and it's really useful for a very specific job in the mid game. And that ability is actually going to be their specialty, More Money. The way More Money works is that after battle, you earn 1.5 times more money than normal after a battle. This is really, really good to just have on throughout the entire game. If you have nothing else to run on a character and you're just looking for slots, and if you're high enough level, like at level 9, just throw More Money on. I started using it in Chapter 3 all the way through Chapter 4, and by the time I was able to grind in Chapter 5, I had enough money to actually speed up the entire process. Meaning, if you want to effectively grind, and if you want to know about that, go check out one of my previous videos, but if you want to be able to effectively grind later in the game for both money, PG, and XP, you basically need to use the More Money job, More Money specialty, as soon as you get it, so that way you can buff yourself for the mid game. And so, because of More Money alone, this is going to come in at number 14. And coming in at number 13 is going to be the monk job. Now, I want to start this by saying I don't think the monk job is very good after like Chapter 3. However, there's no denying its damage potential in both the prologue, Chapter 1, and Chapter 2. This was the job I ran on Tiz for the first like quarter of the game. It's also the only job with an S rank in fists, and the fists are a very, very strong weapon type. Meaning, if you actually want to be able to run those fists, you pretty much have to be able to run the monk. Now, while the monk just has pretty solid base attack and HP on its own, it really shines with a very specific ability here called Qingong Wave. It only costs 12 MP, however, it pierces defaults, which means if an enemy defaults, you're going to go through that and still deal 1.25 damage. Combine that with something like Hidden Dragon or Invigorate here, which raises your physical attack for 2 turns. If you Invigorate Qingong Wave for the first 2 chapters and the prologue, there is almost nothing that will survive your monk. It's very, very strong early on. I also just want to give a shout out to it being the only job in the entire game to give you the HP up support ability. It not only has HP 10% up, it also has HP 20% and HP 30%, which is the only job that has all 3 of those included in one ability list, making it really good for some of the jobs later in the game that rely on having HP and using the HP. And coming in number 12 is going to be the Ranger job. And honestly, just look at those outfits. truly some of the most unique outfits in the game. Most of the time, the male and female characters have pretty much the same outfit with slight differences, especially like Tiz and Ringabel will have almost the same outfit. This one just is so fun because they're different colors, they are different animals. I just think, honestly, the Ranger outfits look really cool. However, that's not why we're putting it at number 12. The reason we're putting it at number 12 is because when you get it, it has the potential to be the highest DPS throughout both chapters 2 and chapter 3. And that is because of this ability right here, the hunting ability. These slayers are very, very strong. Basically, if you remember earlier when I said you could view what enemy family they belong to, basically each of these slayers will deal additional damage to those families. So the demon slayer will deal additional damage to demons, undead slayer undead, dragon slayer dragon, and so on. It also is the only job that gets the S rank in bows, which is considered one of, if the most, not the most powerful weapon type in the game. It has high crit chance, high hit rate, and just does a ton of damage. It's very, very strong. This is what I ran on Tiz up from chapter 2 to the end of chapter 3, and it really held on pretty good. However, the one reason it falls off and isn't ranked higher is actually because of two families, both the inorganic and the human families. Inorganic you don't fight very often, however, there's quite a bit of them early game, and you have no effective way of dealing with them with Tiz or your hunter. They never get the inorganic slayer, and most of them are just weak to magical attacks anyways, meaning the hunters are basically useless against it. However, the biggest disappointment is the lack of effective ways to deal with humans. These enemies here are humans, and they never get the human slayer. They get slayers for every other type except for those two, and there are more human enemies in the game than any other family in the game. Almost every boss is a human, and most of the time in every dungeon, there's going to be at least one human family enemy, meaning they just don't have an effective way to deal with most enemies in the game. And because of that, despite having really good ways to deal with most enemies and being the only S rank in bow, I had to put it at number 12. And just past the halfway point, coming in at number 11, is going to be the Knight job. This is your tank at the beginning of the game. It's incredibly, incredibly bulky and just an honestly consistent tank throughout the whole game. I find it much better than Templar, which is supposed to be your tank in the late game. I just still find Knight to be better. They're very consistent, and throughout the prologue and through the end of chapter 1, there really wasn't an enemy who could deal more than like 5 to 10 damage to my character that was a Knight. However, that's not the reason it is at number 11. The reason it's at number 11 is because it has one of the most broken support abilities in the entire game. I think only next to one more. And that support ability is going to be the level 2. That's right. Level 2 support ability, two-handed. If you do not equip something in your left hand and you equip a sword, axe, spear, stave, or katana in your right hand, then you will deal double damage with that weapon's physical attack. If you combine that with the ability Stomp at level 1, where you deal 1.25 times the amount of damage, you're doing damage that is strong enough to kill, I think, every boss throughout both the prologue and chapter 1. It starts to fall off during chapter 2, however, I still used Stomp and two-handed up until the end of chapter 4. Two-handed was my go-to for both of my physical attackers, both Edea and Tiz, until I got what I believe is the strongest support ability in the game, which I will cover a little bit later. I also want to give a quick shout out to the physical defense 30% up. Again, very strong. Whoever you have built as a tank, just get them to level 12 on a Knight, give them that physical defense 30% up. And at level 3, they get the physical defense 10% up, which is another really solid support ability. I ran these first 3 abilities up until level chapter 3, and then I still continue to use two-handed and physical defense 10% up all the way through the end of chapter 4. So it just honestly has some really good abilities that you get at the start of the game since you get this job in the prologue. Absolutely insane, and that's why it's sitting at number 11. And so we're finally on to the top 10. And coming in at number 10 is going to be the Salv Maker. This job on paper looks like one of the most honestly useless jobs in the game, but I find it very, very useful. Throughout most RPGs, I don't find myself using items a lot. However, this job basically encourages you to use items and gives you a reason for it. You have medication here, which has some good skills like resurrect, which brings everybody back from KO just for free, as well as you just get an item. You can just collect an item. If you're not doing anything else, you can collect it. However, two of the most important ones here are turn toxic. You can use something like an X potion to not only deal like 1500 damage, but also poison an enemy just for free. You can also do widen area, which makes a single item affect all targets, meaning if you want to hit every target with a Phoenix down your entire party or an X potion, you can. It's really, really cool. And the biggest thing here is compounding. Compounding items don't have any other purpose in this game except for to be used by the Salv Maker. So it just gives you a reason to actually use these items, which you've probably been collecting throughout the whole game. But again, that's not the reason I think this is the 10th best job in the game. That's going to be just another support skill. And that support skill is going to be the level 4 attack item amp. This raises the damage dealt by attack items to 1.5 times normal. If you don't know what attack items are, basically they're items you can buy or get throughout the game that deal a set amount of damage to an enemy. That set amount of damage, for instance, might be 1500 damage. If it's against an enemy who's resistant, it'll be about 1000 damage, and if it's against an enemy who's weak to it, it'll be about 2000 damage. However, with attack item amp, it increases that by 1.5 times. The reason I find this so useful is that throughout the entire game, you might be so close to defeating a group of enemies who are just, they're killing you, all your party members are dead, and you just need to throw an item. I had to do it tons of times where I was like, okay, well, the only way I'm going to win this is to spam my braves and throw a bunch of items, and using this attack item amp makes it much more useful to do throughout the game. However, again, the main purpose of attack item amp is for the best grinding spot in the game. If you haven't checked out my other video, go back and check it out where I go over how to grind. However, without attack item amp, you're hurting yourself. You're shooting yourself in the foot. It makes it speed up that entire process by about 2 times the amount of speed just because of attack item amp. And for that reason alone, for letting me get up to level 70 in 20 minutes and having over 2 million PG in about 30 minutes, I have to give this a ranking of 10, just breaking that top 10 mark. And so we've finally hit that mark where I just think every job going forward is good. I think it's good throughout most of the game. I think it has tons of uses, and I personally used it or its abilities throughout most of the game. Coming at number 9 is going to be the Black Mage. I've seen a lot of people complain about this job. However, you have to understand the damage it does through Chapter 3. This is one of only 2 jobs that really can exploit enemy weaknesses. And just having access to all of these different damaging spells throughout the game is insane. Early enemies that have weaknesses to lightning, water, or fire elements can pretty much be 1 or 2 shot just by elements. Even Thundara here, we are in chapter 6 or 7 right now. These enemies shouldn't take any damage from Thundara. There's just no reason for them to. However, the Black Mage is just going to fry them. It's so strong, it's consistent damage, and throughout the prologue and chapter 1 at the minimum, you're going to be doing so much. Like right there, that guy wasn't even weak to it, and I am not built to be a Black Mage right now. I am doing no additional magical attack, nothing, and it still killed really, honestly, stronger enemies than what you're fighting at the end of chapter 4. Just killed them in 1 turn from 1 guy. I think Black Mage is way stronger than people give it credit for, and especially in the first 2 chapters in the prologue of the game, it's going to carry you by itself through them. And for that, it is sitting at number 9. And coming in at number 8 is probably my second favorite job in the entire game. I have never used spell swords in any game, but the spell fencer in this game is just on a whole nother level. It has insanely high physical damage, and the whole point of it is that you look at what an enemy's weak to. So for example, this kobold's weak to lightning, and you just go, oh, okay, well, my sword is now not only going to do sword damage, but it's also going to do Thundaga damage, meaning it is a combination of, say, the monk and the Black Mage combined, and you get it at the end of Chapter 1. This is just insane. And when you combine this with things like the Pirate job or other really high damaging jobs, even the Ranger, which you get in the job or the chapter right after that, you can put out an insane amount of damage. I ran this on my Edea up through Chapter 4. And even now, I think it was actually Chapter 5 before I took her off Sword Magic. The outfits are cool. The damage is cool. It's just insane the kind of potential you can do, especially to enemies and bosses with weaknesses. Truly, any boss with a weakness to fire, ice, or lightning throughout the whole game, it just gets destroyed by the Spell Fencer, combined with pretty much any other physical damage dealing job. And for that, it is at number 8, very happily. And coming in at number 7 is going to be the Spiritmaster. You get this Spiritmaster at the exact same time as Arkinist, and the Spiritmaster is basically supposed to be the stronger version of the White Mage. Very similar to how the Arkinist is supposed to be the stronger version of the Black Mage. However, the Spiritmaster does it right. This job by itself is nothing special. It has some cool abilities and everything. However, where it really shines is the buffs it gives to white mages and technically red mages, pretty much anything that's using the white magic abilities. Again, it doesn't have attacks. There are no attacks here. All it does is buff your support characters with some very, very specific support abilities. And there are 3 support abilities that I really like from this. Starting with the specialty, the Save White Magic MP. Basically, if you have this job equipped, you just lower the MP cost of white magic by 25%. On top of that, it is only its level 6 skill, meaning even if you don't want to run this as your primary job, which I highly recommend you run this as your primary job over the White Mage, you can still get the Save White Magic MP at level 6. The other thing it has is it has this, Holy One. You lower your physical attack by 25%, but you boost the effectiveness of recovery magic by 2.5 times. I want to put this in perspective. With this ability equipped, which you're not attacking physically with your Spiritmaster or White Mage anyways, but with this ability equipped alone, your Cure, your first white magic you get at level 1 White Mage that you start the game with, your basic Cure now heals for more than your Cura heals. I don't think it's as much as the Curaja, but it does heal for more than your Cura heals, meaning your Cura heals more than your Curaja heals, and your Curaja heals more than your base Curaga heals, and your Curaga, you don't even need to use at this point, because you're healing more than you ever need to with just a Cure or a Cura. I like to just spam Cura with my White Mage all the time, and Holy One is the reason I can do that. It's so insane. And on top of that, it just has some natural abilities that give you immunity or resistance to your elements. So, such as Greater Spirit Ward here. For 2 BP, which you're not really using your BP with your White Mage anyways, all elemental damage to all allies is reduced for 4 turns. So, every element that you could take damage from, it's reduced for 4 turns. By the time this runs out, you'll have enough BP to recast it. I haven't found as many uses for things like your Spirit Wards and your Wards, which really are just buffs for your characters. However, Holy One and Save White Magic MP makes it so I can run through 3 or 4 dungeons and multiple bosses without ever dying and without ever needing to rest to regen your MP. So for the buff it plays on your White Mage and just your healing in general, I have to give it rank number 7. And coming in at number 6 is going to be the Vampire job. Oh man, where to begin with this job? First off, I could see a lot of people putting this at their least favorite job in the game, because the Vampire is your blue mage of this game. That means if you want to make it really good, you can make it really good. If you don't care to make it really good and don't want to use it, you do not have to. It can do a little bit of everything. It can heal, it can debuff, it can do physical damage, it can give effects to different enemies, it can do magical damage. It truly is your jack of all trades and is honestly really, really solid. The way you get your genome abilities, which is the gimmick of the Vampire, is you have to find very specific enemies in the game and then be hit by these attacks. That's why it can really be as good as you want it to be. So one of the hardest things is fighting some bosses that might do a ton of damage to you. You kind of just have to sit there and default until it hits you with the ability you want it to hit you with. That way you can learn it. And then on top of that, you still have to beat the boss. So you have to have a primary vampire get hit by an attack, then still beat that enemy so that way you can save in order to benefit off of it. However, I have found, especially late game, because this is one of the last jobs you get, this can be extremely powerful. Things like White Wind make it just as strong as your main healer if you ever need a backup for anything. It also can just be your debuffer now. It's really, really good, especially if you throw it on your support character that you're using, and that's why it's going to be coming in at number 6 for me. However, I understand if it's lower if you don't want to invest in it. And finally on to the top 5. Coming into 5th place is going to be the White Mage. What isn't to say about the White Mage? This is your primary healer in the game, throughout the entire game. It is the one of 2 jobs that you get from your very first boss fight, and I have run it from chapter 1 up until the very end of the game. There is nothing I have not used this on. I always have White Magic equipped. It's your most consistent healing. It's really your only early game healing. It cures status effects, and it is the only way that you can do air damage. Now, unfortunately, you're not going to be doing a lot of wind damage, but even things like Dispel and Arise make certain bosses just absolutely crazy, as well as one of their final abilities being Holy, making it one of only 2 jobs that actually get to do consistent light damage. However, it doesn't end there. Its ability list truly just help itself, but they're so good. Starting here with Angelic Ward, it has a 50% chance to have the damage received, no matter what kind of attack. This is so good early game when you first get it, and can make certain boss fights just not kill you from an attack that could insta-kill you because you have that 50% chance to have the damage. On top of that, this ability right here, Epic Group Cast. This is a level 12 ability, however, the way it works is that the damage dealt from offensive spells, and more importantly, the amount of recovery that you do not decline when group casting magic. Meaning, and this is where the Spiritmaster really comes into play, if you say, use a cure, which is now boosted because of Spiritmaster, and you use that cure on every person, where normally you would cure about 100 points spread out evenly across 4 people, it no longer does that. You have no decline to group casting. This makes it so every single turn, you can spam, I'm not even kidding, at level 74, you can spam Cure All Cures and keep your party at maximum HP. Now, unfortunately, this is really the only consistent healing in the game, but I just can't put it any lower than number 5 because it's the most useful job throughout, all the way from the prologue all the way to the end of the game. And coming in at number 4 is going to be the Performer. What's not to say about the Performer? This is truly the best support job in the entire game. It just has so many good abilities with the Sing here. Starting with Love Power, this is the first ability it gets, and it just raises all your allies' physical attacks by 25% up to 150%. Meaning, from the time you get it, 2 BP, your allies are now max power that they can get throughout the entire game. It's absolutely insane. Combined with something like Got Your Back, which raises all targets' physical defense by 4 turns, again, 25%, meaning if you have all BP on your support, you can give your entire team max damage and max defense for 4 turns. By the time you can refresh that, you're going to have all your BP back. It's absolutely insane. Not to mention it's like probably the best BP battery in the game. You can use one more for you to just raise a target's BP by 1. When you're having your characters constantly go brave and use all their BP, and then you're able to give them another turn of using all their BP because you use one more for you on them, it's mind-blowing how much damage you can put out. But even still, it doesn't stop with just the singing, because there's a support ability that makes you almost unkillable. And that ability is the 9th level ability, Buff Up. I did not know how strong this was for the longest time. The way Buff Up works is your physical attack, physical defense, and magical defense, so your attacks and defense stats, each rise 5% for 5 turns at the end of each turn for a max of 150%. This means if your performer doesn't get hit for basically 5 turns, They are almost unkillable. I'm not even kidding. I'm in chapter 6 at level 70. Not at this point, but I was. And my Ringabel was the last character standing against a fight of multiple boss enemies, and they could not do more than 1 damage to him. Now, I had good gear on Ringabel, however, also, buff up just kept buffing him every turn, and he could not be hit for more than 1 damage. It was a joke, and because Performer wouldn't have even been above White Mage if it wasn't for buff up. Truly, if you build it right, you can make one of your characters nigh unkillable. And for that, it is at number 4. And here's the ranking I think I'm going to get the most hate for. Coming in at number 3 is the Pirate. This is a job that usually does not get a lot of credit. However, throughout chapter 3 and 4, this is your highest damaging job in the game. It can't be beaten, and I'm going to show you exactly why, and it's from 2 abilities that you can continue to run throughout the entire game. You're looking at Piracy here, and you're going to be looking for Shell Split. This attacks and lowers the target's physical defense, meaning you can debuff any enemy you want to. You can do that with magical defense, speed, anything you want. This is your earliest debuffer, and truly the best debuffer until you get the vampire completely maxed out. If you combine this with this skill right here, double damage, which does 2 times your usual power, and then you combine it with the spell fencer that I mentioned earlier, you can hit the damage cap as early as level 3. This was my only job until post chapter 5 and even post chapter 6 that I was able to hit the damage cap consistently. Now the one downside, double damage costs 100 MP, so you're not going to be able to use it a lot. However, it is very, very strong. You combine this with two-handing a weapon, combine it with your spell fencer if something's weak to that damage, combined with Shell Split, and your performer's buffs that they're going to be giving you, and the Pirate can consistently put out the highest damage in the game for chapters 3 and 4, which in my personal opinion were the 2 hardest chapters in the entire game. On top of that, it gets physical attack up by 20% as a support ability, so you can just get yourself even stronger with a very simple support ability that you're going to be able to run anyways. There's a lot of people that don't give the Pirate enough credit, and I think there's going to be a lot of people that disagree, and if you do, let me know in the comments. However, I just cannot not give the Pirate enough love. I think it's fantastic. I absolutely love using it. I still use Piracy in chapter 6 of the game. I think it's a lot of fun, and for that reason, I gotta put it at number 3. And so the only thing that can get better than insane damage is even more insane damage. So coming in at number 2 is the Dark Knight. This is a mandatory job. It's one of the only mandatory jobs in the game. You have to get it in order to proceed with the story. And I believe that the Dark Knight has the best damage in the entire game. It can deal with bosses, and it can deal with regular enemies. You have a couple different things you can do here. Starting with Darkbane. Darkbane expends 20% of your maximum HP for a very strong dark attack, which is also physical damage on an enemy. And then you can get Blackbane, which is the same thing, but it hits every enemy on the screen. Blackbane with auto, you can just run through dungeons, killing every enemy basically in one hit, as long as you're constantly healing your characters. However, that's not where it ends. Where this class goes crazy is with a combination of life or death. This maxes out your stats, but in 4 turns, you are guaranteed KO'd. You then use Rage. You continue to use Darkbane until your HP falls to 1. Exactly 1. You can't use Darkbane if you're at 19% of your max HP. If you're at 5% of your max HP, then you will still use it until your HP hits 1. Rage alone lets you hit a boss 5, 6, or 7 times for anywhere from 5,000 to maximum damage with life or death equipped, which is buffing your stats. And then, in the same turn when you are going full Brave out, at 1 HP, you use Minus Strike. This is an attack that does more damage when you have less HP. This is a set number of damage, which means every time you see minus strike, it's going to do the same amount of damage. At 1 HP, this is the highest hitting regular attack in the game. You can't even crit with it. I've never seen myself crit with a minus strike. However, I see myself hit 3 times for 5 to 6 to 7,000 damage consistently using minus strike. There are bosses in the game that I have killed in one turn by having both Tiz and Edea just completely decimate them with life or death followed by rage and 3 minus strikes. It's insane, and just to show this off, I'm going to do a single Black Bane, not even buffed, and I'm going to one-shot all of those goblins for about 7,000 damage. I think this is the highest damage in the game. I think it's a comfortable number 2, and you might be wondering, what could possibly be better than this? Coming in at number 1, at what I think is the best job in this game, but also my personal favorite job in the game, is the Ninja. I think this is one of the most busted, if not the most busted job in the game because of one skill, which is the skill that I think is the strongest skill in the game, Utsusume. This lets you evade 1 physical attack. That's all it does. You just evade 1 physical attack. However, it's way more powerful than you can think, and it requires some very specific skills, which all come from the ninja. So let's talk about those skills. Let's start with their specialty, dual wield. This makes it so when you can always dual wield in the game. However, this makes it so when you equip a weapon in both hands, which normally only does 50% of the weapon's physical attack, you now do 100% of that damage, which means instead of double damage like the one-handed does or the two-handed does, now you are doing 100% damage with 2 different weapons. That is the best specialty that I think exists in the game. I put that on both my physical attackers. I give them 2 weapons apiece. They then attack twice with their normal attack. It is just insane. But it still doesn't even stop there. While I do think that's the best specialty in the game, this job just gets even better with a couple abilities here. Let's start with their level 2 ability, Transience. You evade an enemy attack and counterattack, dealing the same damage as a conventional attack. Which means, with the skill Utsusume, which I just talked about, which is a guaranteed physical attack, you evade a physical attack, you then guaranteed counter for normal damage. Remember how I said the Swordmaster was bad because you still take damage? With Utsusume, you don't take damage, and then you counter with an even stronger attack. And then, with something like Comeback Kid, your magic attack and more importantly your physical attack rise 25% for 3 turns every time you evade an attack. So you have a guaranteed 100% evade. You then 100% counter, and then you raise your damage by 25%. But it still doesn't stop there. You have, this is with no equipment added, your agility is the highest out of every job in the game. This affects your evasion rate, not really important. However, it also impacts your hit count, your speed, and your first strike rate, which means you're gonna go first in every fight. Just guarantee you're gonna go first in every fight. The hit count is the amount of times your weapon deals damage, which means I naturally get a hit count of 10 or 12 almost every attack, and first strike rate, again, means you're going to go first every battle. And then you have your high dex, which affects your physical attack accuracy, which means you're going to hit every time, and your brave attack rate, which means you're still going to hit more on braves. And I have also found, there's no stat here, I've never been able to find it, but I have found that I actually get even more crits with this job. Like, he crits all the time, and on a crit, he's dealing maximum damage. And still, it does not stop there. If you give him katana lore, I love katanas, I've said it before. If you give him katana lore, you can use the katana special, specifically Breaking Wave, which gives critical rate up for all allies. What it doesn't tell you here is that the critical rate up is 100% crit chance. Meaning if you're using katanas, using katana lore, which is the whole reason that the Swordmaster even got where it was, you have a 100% crit chance on every single one of your attacks. You're hitting a lot. You're dual wielding, which means if you attack 4 times, you're actually attacking 8 times. Every single one's a crit. And what if I told you? It still doesn't stop there. Remember how I mentioned turntables earlier when we went over the Red Mage? Turntables raises your BP by 1 when evading an enemy attack. Meaning, when you use Utsusume to get a guaranteed evasion, and then you counter with transients, guaranteed counter, and then you increase your damage when you counter, you then also get a BP when you counter. And your counter is 100% crit chance with your katana lore letting you use your ability. This job is absolutely insane. If you remember how I went over the dragons in chapter 4 that have 90,000 or 900,000 HP, this is why you can beat it. All you have to have is transients and turntables and Utsusume, and the dragons cannot hit you. If you do not believe me, go back and check my video in the Let's Play called The Dragons, where I cheese them all. And so that is the reason I think this job truly is the strongest job in the game. And so, with all that said, please let me know in the comments if you guys agree with my list or not. But before we wrap things up, I do just want to quickly give recommendations for every single chapter and what I personally used or what I didn't use and what I think is the best jobs to use. I will not be going into abilities and I will not be going into sub-jobs. I'll just be going over the main jobs and quickly mentioning a few key notes throughout it. Also note, I'll be mentioning that at the end of the chapter, that's what you're supposed to be using because you do gain jobs throughout. So we're going to be going based off the end of that chapter and onwards, up through chapter 4. By the end of the prologue, you don't have very many options, so I recommend you run 1 monk, 1 white mage, 1 black mage, and 1 knight. That gives you a baseline throughout the entire game. You do not have to copy the characters I ran, but I do recommend you just have 1 person on all 4 of the starting jobs by the end of the prologue. By the end of chapter 1, I recommend you either change your white mage to a time mage to get a couple more benefits, or you just keep them as a white mage. Either one works. Personally, I made them a time mage at least by the end of chapter 1. As for your black mage, again, I recommend you start working on them being the merchant. This is going to be very useful later on. I went ahead and threw the merchant on, keeping black mage as their support skill. And then what I'd recommend you do is either switch your knight or your monk over to be the spell fencer. Personally, I made my knight my spell fencer. I kept the knight skills because stomp combined with spell fencer is very, very powerful. And I kept my monk as a monk through the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2, a lot more things will change. By the end of chapter 2, I kept my spell fencer as a spell fencer. I found it very powerful. I think it's very strong, especially with stomp from the knight. So I kept my knight into spell fencer, and by the end of chapter 2, they stayed a spell fencer. As well as my time mage / white mage. I swapped between them, making them either a time mage or a white mage, depending on if I needed new skills to use. So I'd keep your healer just as your healer and support character. As for your merchant / black mage, at this point, I started dabbling in summoner. I think it was a very, very good call, especially for a couple fights later on. So if you feel you need to do the same, go ahead and start getting a couple levels in summoner. You honestly don't need more than like level 3 or level 4, but if you want to, go ahead and do that. As for the biggest change, I made my monk into a ranger. Ranger is very, very strong. At the end of chapter 2, I ran it all the way through the end of chapter 3. So if you kept your monk as a monk, go ahead and switch them to a ranger. If you kept your knight as a knight, go ahead and switch them to a ranger. Basically, whichever one of your 2 physical characters you kept, go ahead and switch them to the ranger. I think it's very, very strong, especially for the upcoming chapter. By the end of chapter 3, you've actually got more jobs than you ever have at this point. However, I do keep my support unit, my healer, switching between time mage and white mage. Those are my 2 primary abilities for them by the end of chapter 3 going into chapter 4. However, one of the biggest changes is my black mage / merchant, who is dabbling in summoner, is now becoming a full-time performer and Salv Maker. You get both of these in this chapter, so I recommend you choose one or both, get them really high level, then swap to the other one. I prefer keeping my performer as the primary job because their specialty save singing MP. So I kept them as a performer with a secondary in Salv Maker. You could do the opposite, but I think both of these are good for whoever was your black mage / merchant, who you want to be more of your support character while keeping your healer more as your healer. As for your 2 physical attackers, what I did at this point, it doesn't really matter, but whoever was your spell mage, I turned into the pirate. The pirate does a lot of damage. I ranked it really high. You guys saw that. It's going to continue to do a lot of damage all the way through the end of Chapter 4. So by the end of Chapter 3, I grabbed the pirate at the very beginning of Chapter 3. I recommend throwing it on as soon as you get it and just run it throughout all of Chapter 3. As for my other character, who is the ranger, you actually don't grab the ninja until the very end of Chapter 3. Basically going into Chapter 4 is when you can go get it. However, I recommend you change whoever was the ranger, whoever was the monk, over to ninja. Even if you don't want to, make one of your 2 physical damage dealers a ninja. I kept it on the rest of the game. It carried me. It's so strong. So as soon as you get access to it, I'd recommend you do it. And as I mentioned in my other list, you also get Swordmaster in this chapter. So I'd recommend grabbing Katana Lore, throw it on your ninja, run 2 katanas, make yourself so strong. It's so much fun. By the end of Chapter 4, and what I mean by the end of Chapter 4 is I mean once you've saved the Earth Crystal, that's when we can go over our next ones. I would keep your ninja as your ninja. Do not change it. You have no reason to change it. I would keep your white mage as a white mage. However, you now unlock the Spiritmaster, which is what I'd recommend you start going into for whoever is your white mage. As I've said, it buffs your healing, so you might as well change your white mage over to a Spiritmaster, honestly, till you max out Spiritmaster. You have no reason not to. It's very, very good, very, very cool, and those are really the only 2 jobs you need for your healer. Again, Time Mage is fun, but I didn't really use it at all. You're going to go ahead and keep your performer as a performer. However, if you want to do what I did, you can either keep it as a Salv Maker, or you can make them your Vampire. Vampire also just has a lot of buffing and debuffing, so I went ahead and made my Vampire a debuffer, and my performer a buffer, meaning I can kind of run a buff and debuff on the same character, which is Ringabel. So by the end of Chapter 4, go ahead and make it a performer and ninja, or performer and Vampire. You can keep Salv Maker on if you don't like Vampire, but if you do like Vampire, go ahead and do that. As for your pirate, again, I ran the pirate all the way through the end of Chapter 4, so I recommend doing the same. Just run pirate all the way through. It's still insanely good. You have no real reason to change it. By this point, though, I actually did start going into Ninja Pirate here a little bit, because Ninja gives you that dual wield, which I was able to put on my pirate, wield 2 axes. It was very, very fun, very, very cool. And finally, Chapter 5 onwards. Your final fight in Chapter 4 unlocks you the Dark Knight. You cannot get it before Chapter 4 is over. However, you can't use it till Chapter 5. So that's why I'm grouping it in here. For Chapter 5 onwards, it's not objective, but there's a really, really good team comp you can use. So what I recommend for Chapter 5 onward is your ninja, which could be maxed out now. You now go into Dark Knight. A Dark Knight ninja combo is very, very strong, lets you dodge attacks and counter with a whole bunch of damage. As for your healer, keep doing Spiritmaster and White Mage. It's really, really good. No reason to change that. Same with here. This is what Chapter 5 onwards, really when I started doing Vampire. I didn't do it too much in Chapter 4 because you get it right there at the end. But Chapter 5 onwards, when I really started investing in Vampire / Performer, it became really fun. And finally, for your final damage dealer, this is the one that I kind of float around a little bit. Their primary job, unlike my Ninja Dark Knight, their primary job is Dark Knight and Floater. What I mean by that is it depends who I'm fighting. So Dark Knight Templar has been really cool because I can use the Rampart. Again, Rampart's only good for certain bosses. However, whenever it needs to be used, I can put it with my Dark Knight and have no issues. Also, Dark Knight Ninja for certain bosses. Dark Knight Pirate for certain bosses. This Dark Knight specifically, whoever I have on the floater, is my highest damage dealer. I keep the support abilities the one that just do an insane amount of damage, increasing your physical attack by 30%, and so on. So those are my recommendations. Currently, I'm in Chapter 7. We'll see if anything changes, but I'd really like to know what you guys like to run. I know this has been a long video, but all the videos I've seen don't really go in depth on why things are good. It just says their placing and then moves on. So I wanted to go a little bit more in depth. And if you guys don't agree with my list, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. And if you do agree with my list, also let me know. And if there's any other jobs you want to see or job combos you like to use, let me know because I'd love to use them in my Let's Play, which you should check out on this channel. But that's it for me today, so until the next time, I will see you guys then.